Good? Yeah. All right. Well, as Honey said, this is literally our first week in office. I was sworn in on Tuesday at noon. We don't have email addresses yet. We barely have phone numbers, but we are ready to hear from you. And what we're going to do tonight is the first of what is hopefully many town halls and forums that we do with you. This is something that is urgent, something that we're going to be addressing in the immediate future here in January, but we're going to be doing this all the time. So bear with us a little bit. We're trying something new, having you all in different circles and having a sort of more in-depth conversation around this stuff. But what's exciting is that we're getting started off my term, which will be 4 years as supervisor, working together, listening, coming up with priorities together so that I can take your voice into City Hall. Sound good? All right. I want to thank Tenderloin Community School. Give them a round of applause so they can hear us for hosting us. I want to thank all the volunteers and my staff, who I'll introduce later. And we're going to go ahead and get started with this. Let me tell you what we're doing here. So I'm going to go through and tell you a bit about the particular pot of money that we're going to be allocating as a board and along with the mayor. But really what we want to do is get your ideas and feedback on your priorities as a community. How many of you filled out the survey already? Okay. So anybody who didn't fill out the survey yet, please do that online. There are 4 ways that we're going to get your feedback tonight. So if you feel like if one of them didn't land, hopefully one of the others will land. One is the survey. The second is going to be a conversation that you have in the circles. The third is over there. You can go ahead and write down your budget priorities and put them onto the paper there. And the fourth is that after this is over, me and my staff, at the very least me, will stay here and talk to anybody who wants to share something with me until we're done. So however long that takes, if we have to go outside and do that, we can do that. But this is what I'm doing tonight, and I want to hear from everyone who has something to share. So we're going to get started. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this particular pot of money that we are going to be able to allocate from the Educational Revenue Augmentation Fund. So there's going to be a little bit of a PowerPoint quickly to educate all of us on what it is we're talking about. But I want to be clear that though we're talking about this pot of money, everything that you share tonight we will use moving forward. So if we don't get to your priority with this money that we have here, we're going to get to it in the budget process this year. We're going to get to it sometime over the next 4 years, and I promise you I will fight with you for those priorities. The Educational Revenue Augmentation Fund. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we have a particular pot of money here that the city got that was unexpected that we're going to be able to allocate for some important things for our community. And I want to tell you just quickly how that came to be. So the city and county collects property taxes, commercial property, residential property, and has a particular formula as to how that's allocated. The largest percentage of it goes directly to the city and county. A smaller percentage of it goes to BART. A smaller percentage of it, 9%, goes to SFUSD and City College directly. And 25% goes to something called the Educational Revenue Augmentation Fund. It's basically a fund that, from our property taxes that we send up to the state, that they then use to allocate money back to our schools. So we've been growing a lot and developing a lot as a city. And because of that, our property taxes have grown by 20% in the last 2 years alone. That is a massive amount of growth that has taken place in our city. And the result of that is that we've now given, for the first time, and we're one of just about 4 counties in the state where this is the case, we've given so much money as part of this educational fund that's intended for schools to the state that we've actually exceeded the amount that the state has decided is required for our schools. So the state sets a formula that determines the money that goes to schools, and based on that formula, we've exceeded that amount in terms of our contribution to the Educational Revenue Enrichment Fund, Augmentation Fund. So what I want to be clear about here is that this hasn't meant that the schools have gotten any more money. This number is set by the state and is determined by them, and it doesn't go up from our property taxes going up. But the amount that we've given them has exceeded that. So you understand a little bit about school funding, and I used to be on the school board, so this is something that, and I was chair of our budget committee, so I thought a lot about this. San Francisco Unified School District receives a very low percentage of overall property tax revenues as compared to other counties in the state. So the school district receives about 33%, whereas most other school districts, the median is at 54% of overall property tax revenue. And that's a formula that's set in state law. So what does this mean? Because we've gone over the total amount of educational revenue augmentation fund contributions, we are going to get money back from the state to the city and county. And the total amount is actually for 2 years. We are going to receive $415 million total, combined 2 years, to the city and county from the state that we now have the opportunity to allocate. And this is going to happen separate from the larger budget process, which allocates $11 billion for the total budget. We now have to decide how we're going to use that $415 million. And some of the money is already determined in how it's going to be spent. Some of that is in reserves, some of that is in baseline contributions to certain things that are required in the city charter, like the library, MTA. Some of it will actually go to public schools automatically. Some of it goes to trees. Trees are important. And so some of this is already happening. But once that is allocated, there's $181 million that we now, as the Board of Supervisors and the mayor, in the short term, we're going to decide how to spend that number there. So how will this be decided? The mayor and the Board of Supervisors will decide. The Board of Supervisors will consider proposals. They will send that proposal to the mayor. The mayor will decide to veto it. If you have 8 votes on the Board of Supervisors, you can override the mayor's veto. So this is something that happens in a collaborative way. The mayor has a proposal that she's already made. It's a mix of affordable housing and homelessness and mental health. It's a fairly detailed proposal. It's about half on affordable housing and half on homelessness and mental health. It also has some particular funding to retrofit public housing. It has $4 million in it for street cleaning. So she's made a proposal. The Board of Supervisors in December, before I was there, had a proposal as well. That proposal also spends a significant amount on homelessness and housing. It also has $50 million to purchase grids from PG&E and $10 million on early childhood education, which I'll talk about in a second. There's a question as to whether this money is ongoing or one time. It's my view that it's most certainly ongoing funding. Something dramatic would have to change in order for us to not get this money in the future. Either the state would have to change their formulas or property taxes would have to decrease significantly. And we don't expect either of those things to happen, but there are some folks who believe we should only spend it on one-time things because we can't be sure that we're going to get this in the future. The budget season begins soon, and so this is one part of the conversation. Pretty soon we're going to have a larger conversation on all $11 billion. Last thing, there are 3 propositions. How many of you remember what's called Baby Prop C for early childhood education, preschool? Remember that? So we passed something called, it was Prop C then in June, to fund the biggest investment that this city has ever made in preschool, in early childhood education, child care. We also passed Prop G. How many of you remember Prop G in June? This is to give much needed raises to our teachers, to our educators. And then how many of you remember Prop C from November? Hopefully everybody remembers that. Yes. So that was a massive and much needed investment in homelessness and mental health. And getting up to 4,000 people off the streets. So go to the next slide. So the problem that we have right now is that all of these initiatives are actually on hold because of lawsuits or likely lawsuits that could take anywhere from a year to 7 years to find out what happens. So some terrible people sued the city and said that you can't spend that money because we disagree with the way that you collected the signatures and the percentage that you needed of the vote. So because of that, we're collecting that money, so you're still paying those taxes, or corporations are paying those taxes in some cases, and yet we can't spend that money yet because we have to wait to make sure that we succeed in the lawsuit. So the problem with that is that we want to spend money on Prop C, we want to spend money on both Prop Cs and also Prop G, but right now we have the challenge of not being able to spend the money because of these lawsuits. On Prop G, the school district started to pay the raises, and now we don't have, the school district doesn't have the money to continue the raises because they're not receiving the parcel tax money, and because of that, there's a danger that they're going to have to stop these raises. San Francisco teachers are among the lowest paid as compared to other school districts in the Bay Area, so Prop G would have alleviated that. All right, so now I'm done talking. Are there any, really quickly, because I want to make sure I pass it on to you to have these conversations and to get this feedback, but are there any clarifying questions for everything that I just said? Like, what did something mean? Did that all make sense? Raise your hand if that all makes sense to you. Okay, it's okay if it doesn't. Yeah, sort of. It's actually, I tried to do as quickly as possible to make it as simple as possible. Yes? Neither do I. So we have a grid that's basically run by PG&E and owned by PG&E, and there are some cases in which we require the power to come from public power, like from our own, so from aggregated choice. So public power or public power program. And in those cases, we often have challenges with PG&E in getting access to that power and getting it transferred and all of that. And so some of the supervisors, what they wanted to do is purchase some of that grid and start kind of a down payment on taking some of our own grid into public hands rather than private hands of PG&E as a way to sort of alleviate some of those things that stall when we're building housing or building infrastructure that requires it to be public power. So we can say, all right, we're just going to buy that part from you so that we can easily make it public power and not have to wait for PG&E on everything. So it would cost a lot more to actually purchase the whole grid for the public, but this would be a very small down payment on that. Yeah. Yeah, well, that's exactly what we're talking about tonight, which is how we can best use this money to address urgent priorities like homelessness, and how do we do it as quickly and most effectively as possible. So the answer to that is yes. All right, yes?
So two questions. First, you used 4,000 as the population of homeless on the street. I've heard in excess of 7,700 every night. So are we only talking about helping 4,000 of the 7,700?
The question is, I said that there, I mentioned the number 4,000, which is not referring to the total number of homeless people on the street. It's referring to the number of people who we could have supported in getting into housing through Prop C. So the number you cited, upwards of 7,000, is closer to the number. It's probably actually much higher than that in general. But 4,000 was the number that we were going to be able to help through the funding under Prop C.
One more question.
Yeah.
So what you haven't talked about, or anybody, is about the city starting their own bank. Is there any consideration for that and using this money?
Yes. So the question is, I didn't say anything about the city starting its own bank, and I support that. I absolutely support that. There's some work that still needs to be done to be able to make that transition, and we're not going to be able to do it in the next month or two. But this is a kind of example of something where if we did have a public bank, we would be able to make certain types of investments and certain type of long-range, funding opportunities, et cetera, that we can't do right now because we're stuck with, the private banking. So we would have other types of flexibility and opportunities if we had a public bank. I'm going to take a couple more, and then I want to make sure I turn it over because I don't want to have this all be me talking at you. Yes?
For the $415 million, and for the money that's set aside for the city departments, the board of supervisors and the mayor have their opinion on how these departments.
Right, very good question. So some of the money, actually more than half of the money of the 415 goes to designated purposes like to the MTA, like to the libraries, like to trees, and that money will be allocated by the mayor, by the respective departments under the oversight of the mayor. So the Board of Supervisors doesn't have direct oversight over how that's spent. One of the questions is, should we push to make sure it's spent in a certain type of way? We certainly could legislate that way and all of that, but just them getting the money, it will be their decision under direction of the mayor to decide how to spend. And in the case of the MTA, they're somewhat independent, so they will be able to decide how they spend that money on their own. Yeah.
Speaking of city and county bank, when are we going to push for a state bank like North Dakota? They have no bank to help their own farmers, they have our own bank in California to help our farmers.
Yeah, I support that too. So yes, the state bank, we could start with a local bank, and if we had a city bank, it'd be even bigger than North Dakota's bank, yes. So will we get a lot more from the ERAF surplus? Yeah. Yeah. That's a very good question. There will be an analysis of how much property taxes are going up, and based on that, and the formula that exists with the Educational Revenue Augmentation Fund, we'll have a sense of how much more money we're going to give back. The controller says he estimates right now $200 to $250 a year moving forward. I'm going to pass this to Honey so that we can get started and start to hear from you all, and then we'll come back at the end, and like I said, I will stay here as long as you want to talk about anything that you want to talk about.
Thank you, Supervisor. All right, now's the fun part. We have placed you in small groups. We're going to have a group discussion that is led by our facilitators out there. Can you raise your hand? In our next fiscal budget cycle, so in this coming budget cycle, what projects or specific programs would you like to see funded?
So here's the list. Navigation centers, housing and behavioral health, Prop C bridge, acquisition for housing, and subsidies for low-income housing, and also bathrooms and showers, street cleaning, addressing crime, low-threshold housing, and of course, and then Prop G, like bridge and labor council, some of the labor council suggestions, and for projects you would like to see funded next year, 24-hour pit stop, construction of showers, respite center, and of course, like specific transport officers too. I couldn't read this, but bathrooms and showers came up a lot, and nonprofit acquisition, and of course modular housing, and then modular housing, free muni, and of course food insecurity, addressing that's for special diets. So,
Thank you, Jordan.
Hello, everyone. I'm proud to represent our group. Basically, yay! Well, it's wonderful to work with such collaborative and intelligent people. And basically, we really all agreed that homelessness and mental health services, affordable housing are really key issues, as well as giving money to education because of the programs that have been cut. One of the things we talked about was the fact that the Hummingbird Center has 29 beds right now for mental health in San Francisco, and that is just an unacceptable amount considering the population. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Hi everyone, my name is Claire and this is Zach. We are working the system and we have 2 representatives from our group today. So some of the things that we talked about affordable housing with a wide range of AMI to cover everyone, to cover most people, our most vulnerable populations. We talked about safety in our streets and ideas we had around that were specifically were specific to more streetlights or better streetlights. We talked about community land trusting of rent-controlled buildings and small site acquisition. What else did we talk about? We talked about public parks and having more parks in the district because our district has one of the we're the district with less parks and open space. That's all I have.
Some of the other ideas that were brought up included, of course, homelessness, navigation centers, affordable housing for people exiting homelessness, increase in behavioral health and mental health services, and also public restrooms that are more accessible.
Next speaker.
Hi, I'm Whit, and so our top 3 priorities that our group were able to agree on was public housing, and specifically making sure that below market housing doesn't exceed 30% of folks' income. Oh, sorry. Teacher salaries in Prop G, and then also homelessness. And then for some projects that we're hoping to see funded more is fully funding the minimum compensation ordinance, especially for folks who work in the nonprofit sector, working with folks facing homelessness. Intensive tutoring programs in our public schools, and then making a BART and Muni free clipper process easier and more expansive for families and youth in the TL and SOMA.
I got a question. And I am representing the Arab group, so I'm going to be saying the word Arabic a lot. So we talked about education, we talked about wanting more teachers to teach Arabic, to hire more Arabic-speaking folks on all levels, from social services to managers, principals, and of course teachers. We talked about affordable housing. We talked about more safety and security in our neighborhoods. We talked about assessment of the city of teachers and schools by asking the community, reaching out to the community on asking them what do they want, when do they want it, how do they want it. Some folks talk about reducing the age of children to enter kindergarten, and also public transportation, more affordable. Sorry, it's out of notes. And most importantly, also cultural sensitivity training, maybe hopefully monthly for all USD folks. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Katrina Liwanag, and for our group, the top priorities were number 1, education, but in more specifically after-school programs and childcare with our education system. Also addressing the fact that here in District 6, a lot of API descent has the highest suicide ideation and depression rates as young as middle school. So having mental health facilities and mental health programs for the youth in their schools. Also language access, having more dual immersion programs for folks of all different descents in their schools, so we can make a pipeline of folks to be working in the cities as interpreters. The number 2 priority would be addressing homelessness because it affects all of us. Of course, it affects our physical and mental health. So having more navigation systems, having showers and bathrooms was brought up a lot. Also, a lot of the empty storefronts and boarded up houses, we can be using them and repurposing them for shelters and housing, as well as addressing the fact that District 6 overwhelmingly voted for Prop 10. And then number 3 was, employment, so neighborhood priority for employment and giving adequate training programs for people in District 6 to find jobs.
Next speaker.
Hello, I'm Daniel. For our group, we discussed many of the same things. Childhood education, security on the streets, park rejuvenation. When it comes to the childhood education, main focus of our group was community programs, and then within that, programs after school for multicultural and multilingual programs, so that the kids growing up in this neighborhood have a better chance. The security in the streets focused on cleanliness and safe passage, and McAllen Park, how long has that been installed? Or stalled, and I think with a focus also on teacher salaries and keeping the teachers here so that all those after-school programs then will actually work.
Next speaker.
So our priorities are, first is like, supporting more affordable housing with support services, okay? And we also want that small size acquisition, especially those are being threatened for acquisition by private owned buildings, corporations, and funding for 101 High is like already ready. So then eviction prevention and 50 Jones as well. Of course, funding for mental health services.
Yeah, so we're from the same group, and finding ways in general to make housing like more livable, like for example having more open spaces, maybe having rooftop gardens, maybe growing cannabis and using that as a finding ways to make to subsidize housing. Trying to think of what else we talked about. I think pretty much the guy who just spoke pretty much said most of it.
City gardens, yes, city cannabis gardens. Harm reduction.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thank you.
It's more expensive to buy weed than it is heroin. Heroin's cheaper than cannabis.
Okay, my name is Catherine Wolf, and top 3 priorities was homelessness in terms of affordable housing and the support services necessary to get them off the street through addressing their issues, making it so that once they get off the street that they can stay off the street in terms of jobs as well as even moving up. Mental health, drug addiction, substance abuse. Mental health and support services is very important, not just for those that are homeless, but those that have been formerly homeless or even in the area, because we all suffer through types of trauma. Also, we have education, teacher leaving. We need to make sure we keep them. And then some of the things that, projects we want to see in the next thing, preschool, elementary school, navigation centers and a temporary, using creative use with, for instance, commercial spaces, more permanent housing, and also housing for 30% and below, parks, intergenerational parks and centers and things so too.
Thank you. We have one speaker left. Please keep it down so our interpreters can hear clearly. Our last